You're listening to Player Development, a channel focused on the intersection of sports and character growth. Please like and subscribe to support the stories being shared, the growth of our listeners, and to stay up to date with our latest content. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Isaiah again, and we are back to talk about our relationship with sport. Now we're going into part 2 of this Enes Kanter and LeBron James saga, and I thought we were done the first time I made a video about it. Turns out I have a few corrections to make, and there's actually been some new developments in the story. So the first part was I was talking about Nike's production practices and use of sweatshops. It turns out that that's probably not what Kanter was referring to in his tweet, and he was talking more about China as a market for Nike and for LeBron's shoes and all of their other products, and them not wanting any of their athletes to speak out against China because that would alienate a market and a government that restricts freedom of speech and expression. So that was my oversight, and so having read more, I'm able to provide that correction now and dig into some of those dynamics a little more. And look, at the end of that last video, I was excited for Enes Kanter now. He's changed his name to Enes Freedom after he's gained his American citizenship. So congratulations to him. I know that was a long time coming for him with his family, his father especially, and himself having experienced a lot of political persecution from the Turkish government, including imprisonment. And I think there was at one point death threats against him because of how he spoke out against the oppression of that government. So like I said, there's been some new developments. There was a new layer where Enes Freedom was invited onto the Tucker Carlson show on Fox News. So right away, because of the reputation that Carlson's show has, that raises some red flags for me. That generally this show and that channel has not been friendly to the majority black NBA players who speak out on social justice. And so, okay, fine. I'm going into it with my antenna up. But hey, you know what? Maybe this is just the platform that he was given. So let's see what he has to say with an open mind. And so one of the questions that he was asked is, are you more grateful for your American citizenship than some of your teammates? And right away, this is loaded because obviously the NBA is majority black, and Jaylen Brown, one of Freedom's teammates, has been very outspoken about the Black Lives Matter movement, about police brutality and systemic racism, and during the off-season did a lot of protests and marches and organizing. So that starts out already as a loaded question. And so the first part of Kanter or Freedom's response, I've got no problem with. He talks about his own personal experience. He says that he himself feels very lucky and blessed to have citizenship in America where freedom of speech is protected and all these other freedoms are guaranteed in our system of government and in our culture, especially compared to governments like in China or like in Turkey. I got no problem with him talking about his own personal experience. But then this interview takes a sharp left turn, and you can see it for yourself. I'll try to find a link to put in the comments below. But he starts saying that players are always criticizing the system or this culture, and they should just shut up and be grateful for the greatest country in the world that they live in. And that's not an exact quote. Like I said, you can go and watch the interview for yourself in the comments below. And so the first thing I want to say about his response there, when he starts turning to talking about how other people should talk about America, is that it is very ironic because people should just shut their mouths and not criticize the greatest country in the world. That could very easily be what the Chinese government says to its Muslim minority populations. That could easily be anything that a regime could say to silence their opposition. And, it's also ironic because one of the things that sets America as a country and idea apart from other nations is that freedom to criticize government without fear of government reprisal is one of the things that separates America, that makes America a great country and allows minority groups to be able to speak out and protest and work to change things for the better, to build equity and equality for everyone. And he's talking about silencing that, which actually reverts back to those kind of old style governments that don't allow people to speak out against those in power. And the final thing I'll say about that piece is that in any relationship, whether you're talking about like parent-child, friend to friend, player to coach, or coach to player, lack of critique is not a sign of love. That's a sign of an abusive relationship. So the second thing I want to touch on is some potential race dynamics that are going on here. Enes Kanter, now Freedom, was a Turkish citizen, now an American citizen. But white supremacy in this country has had a history of pitting minority groups against one another. And this is kind of what's happening here, and I want to be careful as I talk about this. I'm not saying that all white people pit minorities against each other, but it's this concept of white supremacy keeps people in power by pitting those lower on the totem pole against each other. So they're fighting each other instead of working to better themselves or each other. And so what he's doing is pitting Enes Freedom, who's speaking out for minorities in China and other honorable and reputable causes, against the social justice causes that LeBron James, Jaylen Brown, other of his teammates and fellow players in the NBA are championing. And this goes back to, even examples such as the model minority myth when it comes to Asian minorities, where Asians were propped up as the model minority. They work hard, they're intelligent, and they don't cause a lot of trouble, that kind of thing. And so then Black and Hispanic minorities were told, why don't you be more like them? And so that created this rivalry or this enmity between two minority groups. And so these minority groups start competing with each other for scraps and leave the system of power in place. And I do want to reference Julie DiCaro, who touches on some of these dynamics in her book, talking about women in sports, that this plays out in patriarchal systems too, in male-dominated media, especially sports media. There might be one token female, and what happens is that women in that workspace start competing with each other for that one spot or for those minor resources, instead of changing the system. They are now infighting against each other and competing with one another for what they perceive to be limited resources when there are actually plenty more opportunities that are available. And this is the dynamic either with the model minority or with patriarchy and women in minority female workspaces that is going on here, that by creating this false animosity and divide between Enes Freedom and LeBron James, or just these differing causes, that you turn minorities or different causes against each other and allow the larger system to stay unchanged as a whole. And so I don't know if LeBron James was just really prescient and knew what was going on, or just knew more about what was going on and potentially the agendas behind all of that to not engage and to try to not make this an issue. I really did have high hopes when Freedom started talking about, how the NBA's relationship with China, Nike's relationship with China is really complicated because of this human rights violations going on there. And I was hopeful for a productive conversation to grow up out of the influence of NBA players who have a huge secondary market in China. They have a ton of viewers, a ton of cultural influence, a lot of money's at stake with all of that. And I was hoping for reform or some influence and awareness to be raised around these issues. But what's happening, again, like I talked about, is this is turning into personal animosity. The narrative is being shifted to LeBron James versus Enes Freedom, or Enes Freedom versus black players. And that's a way for the system to stay the way it is. That's a way for petty dramas to grow in place of productive conversation.